The sun crests over the jagged spine of Mount Hymettus, hitting the white limestone of the Acropolis with a blinding glare that signals the start of the Athenian race. This is not a city that wakes up slowly. It is a city that explodes into motion. There are no clocks, no alarms, and no snooze buttons. The first light is a legal and social mandate. For an Athenian citizen in 430 BCE, the dawn is the opening bell of a high-stakes competition for status, survival, and political relevance. The air smells of charcoal smoke, dried dung, and the briny tang of the Aegean Sea blowing in from the Piraeus. If you enjoyed this dive into the grit of history, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the ancient world. The first physical act of the day is simple and utilitarian. A citizen rolls off a wooden couch, his body stiff from a thin mattress stuffed with wool or straw. There is no private bathroom, no running water, and no ritual of a long, hot shower. He splashes a face full of cold water from a ceramic pitcher, a vessel likely fired in the nearby Ceramicus district, and wraps himself in a himation, a heavy rectangular piece of wool. There are no buttons, no zippers, and no pins. The drape of the cloth is everything. A man who cannot fold his cloak properly is marked immediately as a man of low breeding, a target for ridicule in the marketplace. Outside, the narrow streets are a chaotic labyrinth of packed earth and open sewers. The houses of Athens are not the marble palaces of modern imagination. They are mud brick boxes with shared walls, coated in a crumbling layer of lime wash. As the citizen steps out, he avoids a cascade of gray water thrown from an upper-story window by a slave. There is no municipal sanitation department. Waste goes into the street, and the sun or the rain deals with it. The noise is a wall of sound. The rhythmic clinking of a blacksmith's hammer, the braying of packed donkeys carrying jars of oil, and the constant, underlying roar of thousands of men shouting to be heard over one another. Every man is heading in the same direction, the agora. This is the nervous system of the city, a massive open square bounded by public buildings and stoas. To stay home is to be a non-entity, an idiots, a private person who holds no weight in the scales of the city. The walk itself is a physical gauntlet. The citizen must navigate through the Dipylon Gate, where the smell of fresh bread from street vendors mixes with the stench of the leather tanneries. The tanners soak hides in urine to soften them, a scent so pungent it serves as a permanent landmark for the northern edge of the city. Archaeological excavations at the site of the agora have uncovered thousands of small lead tokens and bronze coins, scattered like seeds in the dirt. These weren't dropped by accident. They were the lifeblood of the morning rush. Men move with a predatory focus. They are looking for news of the grain ships, the latest decree from the bull, or a chance to serve on a jury for the day's pay of 3 obols. The 3 obol pay is the difference between a meal of salted fish and a day of hunger. By the time the sun is a hand's breadth above the horizon, the square is packed. Scythian archers, the city's public slaves acting as a police force, begin to unroll long ropes dipped in red wet paint. They sweep through the outskirts of the square, herding men toward the center. If a man's cloak is marked with red paint, he is fined for being a loiterer, a man who shirked his civic duty to attend the assembly or the courts. The red stain is a mark of shame, a visible proof that he is a parasite on the body politic. The physical reality of the morning is one of constant friction. Men stand chest to back, arguing over the price of charcoal or the quality of a slave being auctioned near the statues of the eponymous heroes. There is no personal space. To live in Athens is to be touched, pushed, and breathed upon by 3,000 other citizens, all vying for the same scrap of influence. The sweat of the morning climb to the Nix Hill begins to soak through the wool himations, creating a thick, musk-filled atmosphere that defines the Athenian morning. In the midst of this, a sudden shout erupts from the northern stoa. A messenger, dust-covered and heaving for breath, has arrived from the borders of Attica. He carries no letters, only his voice. He bellows that the Spartan army has been spotted near the groves of Acharni. The morning commerce does not stop, but its pitch changes. The price of grain in the stalls jumps instantly. The competition for food is now as real as the competition for honor. The news of the Spartans does not stop the hunger. It intensifies the logistics of the morning meal. In Athens, breakfast is not a social event. It is a functional intake of calories designed to sustain a body for a day of standing, walking, and shouting. The meal is called akritismos. It consists of a few pieces of barley bread dipped into undiluted wine. The bread is hard, often gritty with the dust of the millstones used in the bakeries near the Piraeus. It is not the soft, leavened loaves of a modern kitchen. It is a dense, fibrous fuel. The logistics of providing this bread to 200,000 people in the Attic Peninsula is a constant logistical nightmare. Athens cannot feed itself. The rocky soil of Attica is excellent for olives and grapes, but it is a desert for cereal crops. Every grain of wheat or barley that makes its way into a citizen's bowl is the result of a high-stakes maritime gamble. The grain ships must travel from the Black Sea or Egypt, dodging pirates and the Peloponnesian fleet. If the wind fails or a ship founders, the city starves within 10 days. A citizen stands by a stall in the agora, tearing a piece of barley cake. He does not use a knife or a fork. He uses his hands. The wine he dips it into is akratos, strong, dark, and syrupy. This is the only time an Athenian drinks wine without water. To do so later in the day is considered an act of barbarism or a sign of chronic alcoholism. But in the morning, the alcohol provides a quick hit of sugar and energy. It numbs the sting of the morning chill and prepares the gut for the long hours until the main meal at sunset. The cost of this breakfast is a matter of intense public scrutiny. The cytophilics, the grain overseers, patrol the market stalls with a lethal intensity. If a merchant is caught price gouging during a shortage, the penalty is not a fine, it is death. Inscriptions found on the stele of the grain protectors list the names of those executed for messing with the city's food supply. The economy is physical. There are no banknotes. A man pays in silver drachmas or bronze chalkoi, heavy coins that clink in a leather pouch tied to his belt. While the citizen eats, his slaves are already at work. In the corner of the marketplace, a female slave crouches over a portable clay oven, fanning the embers of a charcoal fire. She is preparing tigonites, pancakes made from flour, honey, and sesame seeds. These are sold to the wealthier men who can afford a luxury beyond dry bread. The smell of burning honey fills the air, clashing with the salt air scent of the nearby fish stalls. The fish, mostly small fry like sprats or anchovies, are laid out on marble slabs to keep them cool, though by mid-morning, the flies are a constant, buzzing veil over the produce. Water is the silent currency of the breakfast hour. Every household must send a slave to the public fountains, like the Eniakrunos, to fill heavy ceramic hydrii. The sound of these jars clattering against the stone basins is the rhythmic heartbeat of the city. A man who owns no slave must carry his own water, a mark of such crushing poverty that he is often ignored in the social hierarchy of the square. The social rules of eating are rigid. A man does not eat while walking. He stands or sits in a designated area. To be seen gorging oneself in public is a sign of a gastromargos, a glutton, which suggests a lack of self-control. And a man who cannot control his stomach cannot be trusted to control the state. Every bite is observed. Every transaction is a performance. The breakfast is over in minutes, leaving the citizen with a mouth full of grit and a stomach full of raw wine. As the sun rises higher, the heat begins to bake the mud brick walls, releasing the trapped smells of the previous night's rain. The citizen wipes the crumbs from his beard and turns his attention to the day's labor. He has no office to go to, no emails to check. He has a wall to build or a ship to fit, and the overseers are already calling for the able-bodied. The transition from the breakfast stall to the work site is a shift from the verbal to the visceral. For many Athenians, the day's work involves the physical construction of the city's defense. The long walls, the two massive fortifications connecting Athens to its port at Piraeus, are a permanent construction site. This is not the delicate work of sculptors. This is the brutal, bone-breaking labor of moving stone. Thousands of men, a mix of poor citizens, medics, and slaves, swarm over the limestone blocks. There are no cranes in the modern sense, only pulleys, ropes, and the sheer leverage of human muscle. The Lewis bolt, a metal device inserted into a hole in the stone to lift it, is a standard tool. The sound is a constant drone of chisels biting into rock. Tink, 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 punctuated by the rhythmic grunts of gangs of men pulling on thick hemp ropes. A citizen working on the walls is not an employee in the modern sense. He is a contractor or a day laborer. If he is a freeman, he works alongside a slave, and in the heat of the sun, they are indistinguishable. Both are coated in a fine, white limestone dust that turns their hair and eyelashes gray. Both sweat through their simple tunics. The social difference is only visible when the foreman, the ergostats, barks an order. The slave moves because he must. The citizen moves because he is being paid his daily drachma. The quarries at Mount Pentelicus, miles away, are the source of this stone. The logistics of transport are staggering. Massive sleds, pulled by teams of oxen, drag the multi-ton blocks down the lithogogia, the stone road. The friction of wood on stone generates enough heat to smoke, requiring slaves to constantly pour water under the runners. Inscriptions found on the building accounts of the Parthenon record the exact cost of each ox team and the weight of the iron tools consumed by the work. Iron is a precious commodity. A broken chisel is not thrown away, but taken to the forge to be beaten back into a point. For those not on the walls, the labor might be in the shipyards of Z or Munichia. Here, the work is centered on the trireme, the three-banked warship that is the engine of Athenian power. The air smells of boiling pitch and fresh pine. Shipwrights use bronze adze tools to shape the curved ribs of the hull. There are no blueprints. The knowledge is in the hands and the eyes of the master builders. A citizen here might be tasked with pyuing, smearing the hull with a mixture of resin and wax to make it watertight. The black tar sticks to everything, staining the skin for weeks. In the ceramicus, the potter's quarter, the labor is different but no less intense. The kick wheel is a physical workout for the legs, while the hands must be steady enough to paint the intricate scenes of gods and heroes. The heat from the kilns is oppressive, turning the narrow alleys into ovens. The potters work in a permanent haze of smoke. If a kiln is fired incorrectly, a week's worth of work, hundreds of vases, can be ruined in an hour, shattering into ostraca, the ceramic shards that the city uses for voting or exile. There is no concept of a weekend or a 9 to 5. Work lasts until the sun goes down or the task is finished. There are no safety regulations. A snapped rope on the long walls means a crushed limb or death. There are no pensions. A man works until his body fails him. The physical reality of Athens is built on the backs of men whose joints are swollen with arthritis and whose lungs are scarred by stone dust. As the sun reaches its zenith, the heat becomes a physical weight. The hammers slow, but they do not stop. The city is hungry for defense, hungry for ships, and hungry for the silver that pays for it all. The competition for resources is about to move from the construction site back to the heart of the city, where the real battle of the marketplace begins. The high noon sun transforms the agora from a place of assembly into a searing arena of raw commerce. In Athens, there are no banks with marble columns or digital ledgers. There is only the trapeza, the wooden table of the money changer. This is the physical front line of the Athenian economy. A merchant from Chios or Aegina stands before the table, dumping a heavy leather bag of silver coins onto the wood. The sound is a sharp, metallic crash that cuts through the humidity. The money changer doesn't look at the faces on the coins. He picks up a touchstone, a dark piece of jasper, and rubs the silver against it. The color of the streak tells him if the coin is pure or a copper-core fake. Trade is a contact sport. There are no fixed prices and no price tags. Every transaction is a verbal duel. A citizen wanting to buy a gallon of Attic olive oil must engage in a ritual of aggressive negotiation. The seller bellows the virtues of his press, swearing by Zeus that his olives were handpicked in the groves of Academus. The buyer sneers, pointing out the sediment at the bottom of the jar. They stand inches apart, their breath mingling in the heat. To accept the first price offered is not a sign of wealth. It is a sign of a fool who deserves to be fleeced. The physical exchange of goods is a labor-intensive process. Heavy ceramic amphorae, the standard shipping containers of the ancient world, are hauled from carts by slaves whose backs are permanently calloused from the rope burns. These jars, filled with wine, honey, or pickled fish, are stacked in tight rows. Archaeological finds at the bottom of the Aegean show how these jars were wedged together to prevent shifting during a storm. In the market, if a jar cracks, the loss is immediate and absolute. There is no insurance. A merchant's entire fortune can leak into the dust of the agora in a matter of seconds. Weights and measures are the only laws that matter here. The metronomoi, the official inspectors of weights, move through the stalls with bronze standards. They drop official weights into the scales of grain dealers to ensure no one is using a hollowed-out lead weight to cheat the public. A merchant caught with a light scale is dragged to the Stone of Oaths, where he is publicly shamed and his goods confiscated. The tension is constant because the margin for survival is thin. A bad trade doesn't mean a lower quarterly profit. It means a family goes without bread for a week. As the heat peaks, the scent of the market becomes a physical entity. It is a thick mixture of unwashed wool, roasting chickpeas, and the metallic tang of the bronze smith's quarter. The battle of the market is won by those with the loudest voices and the toughest skin. Every drachma changed is a victory in a social war where the goal is to extract value while maintaining the facade of a kalos kagathos, a good and noble man. But beneath the noble talk, the silver is the only thing that talks. The competition for the best goods is fierce, and the stakes rise as the freshest catch arrives from the coast. The agora is a boiling pot where the three tiers of Athenian society, citizens, medics, and slaves, are forced into constant, grinding contact. You can tell a man's status not by his face, but by his feet and his posture. A citizen walks with the skol, the gait of a man who owns his time. He stops to talk politics, his hands clean of the grime of the stalls. Beside him, a metic, a resident foreigner from Corinth or Thrace, moves with a frantic energy. The metic is the engine of the economy, but he has no vote. He pays the metoikian tax for the privilege of living here, and if he fails to pay, he can be sold into slavery on the spot. The interaction is governed by rigid, unspoken rules. A slave carrying a heavy load of timber must yield the path to any citizen, regardless of the citizen's wealth. If a slave accidentally brushes against a freeman's cloak, he risks a sudden blow from a walking stick. There is no legal recourse for the slave. His body is empsychon organon, a living tool. Yet, in the chaos of the market, the lines blur. A wealthy slave manager, dressed in fine linen, might be seen giving orders to a group of poor citizen laborers. The physical reality of power is often at odds with the legal status of the men involved. Women are almost entirely absent from this public sphere, except for those of the lowest status. The women seen in the agora are either slaves fetching water or hetainai, high-class companions whose presence is a calculated display of a man's wealth. A citizen's wife is a ghost, confined to the inner rooms of the house. To see a respectable woman in the market is a sign of a family in total collapse, a social disaster where the husband has failed his primary duty of providing. The metic status is a social tightrope. These foreigners run the banks, the shipping lanes, and the armor-making workshops. They are often richer than the citizens who look down on them. In the Ceramicus, the most famous vase painters are often medics, their names signed in the clay as a mark of pride. But they can never own land in Attica. They live in rented rooms, their wealth portable and precarious. One wrong word against a powerful citizen can lead to an asabia, impiety, charge, and immediate expulsion. Physical intimidation is the silent language of the streets. Groups of young men from wealthy families, the hippies or cavalry class, walk in phalanxes, forcing others into the gutters. They carry themselves with an aggressive entitlement, their bodies honed in the gymnasiums to be weapons of the state. To challenge them is to invite a lawsuit or a beating. In Athens, the rule of law is a thin veneer over the rule of the strongest and most well-connected. The social hierarchy is reinforced at every corner, from the way a man sits to the way he addresses a magistrate. But as the sun begins its slow descent, the focus shifts from social posturing to the grueling physical preparation required for the city's defense. As the sun reaches its zenith, the agora empties of everyone except the desperate. The heat in Athens during July is a physical assault, reflecting off the limestone and trapping the air in the narrow alleys. For the Athenian citizen, the midday break is not for sleep. It is for the gymnasium. This is where the body is prepared for the only job that truly matters: war. Men head to the academy or the lyceum, outskirts of the city shaded by olive groves, to strip naked and coat themselves in olive oil. The gymnasium is a place of intense, sweat-soaked labor. There are no machines. Men wrestle in the palestra, their bodies slick with oil and dusted with fine sand to allow for a grip. The sound is a chorus of slapping skin, heavy breathing, and the bark of the petatribes, the physical trainers. They practice the pankration, a brutal mix of boxing and wrestling where the only forbidden moves are biting and eye gouging. This isn't sport in the modern sense. It is a simulation of the chaos of a hoplite phalanx, where a man must be able to fight with his hands when his spear snaps. The oil serves a dual purpose. It protects the skin from the sun and makes the muscles pop, a visual display of irate excellence. After the workout, the men use a strigil, a curved metal scraping tool, to remove the mixture of oil, sweat, and grit. This gloios, the scrapings from the bodies of famous athletes, is actually collected and sold as a medicinal ointment for aches and pains. The physical waste of the elite is a commodity for the poor. While the elite train, the city's infrastructure continues to bake. The public baths, or balania, are cramped, humid rooms where men huddle around circular stone basins. There is no lounging in hot tubs. You stand and have a slave pour cold water over your head from a ceramic jug. It is functional, loud, and crowded. The steam from the charcoal braziers used to heat the water makes the air thick and hard to breathe. For the poor citizen or the laborer, there is no gymnasium. He finds shade under a portico or a plane tree, eating a handful of dried figs and trying to preserve his energy. The noon heat is a divider of classes. The wealthy use it to build their bodies. The poor use it to survive the exhaustion of the morning's labor. But even in the shade, the social competition continues. Men discuss the latest tactical innovations in shield-bearing or the endurance required for the upcoming rowing season in the fleet. The heat also brings the threat of the Great Plague back to the minds of the elders. They remember 430 BCE, when the heat and the crowding inside the city walls turned Athens into a charnel house. Any sign of a fever or a cough in the midday sun sends a ripple of unspoken fear through the crowd. The city is a pressure cooker, and the physical toll of the environment is a constant reminder of how quickly civilization can collapse. The midday rest is short. The shadows begin to lengthen, and with the cooling air comes the call of the most dangerous place in Athens, the law courts. The cooling of the afternoon air does not bring peace. It brings the dikasteria, the law courts. In Athens, litigation is a blood sport. A citizen walking home from the gymnasium can be stopped by a sycophant, a professional informer, and served with a summons on the spot. There are no police to arrest you. The accuser must physically confront you in front of witnesses. The trap is set with a verbal formula, a prosklesis, which mandates your appearance before a magistrate. To ignore it is to forfeit your property, your status, and potentially your life. The court itself is a physical machine of judgment. At the entrance, citizens scramble to insert their panakion, a small bronze or lead ID plate, into the clariterion. This is a massive stone slab with slots and a tube filled with black and white balls. It is a randomization engine designed to prevent bribery. If a white ball drops, the citizen is a juror for the day, earning his 3 obols. If it is black, he returns to the street, penniless. Thousands of these lead plates have been recovered from the agora, many bent or scratched by the hands of desperate men hoping for a lucky draw. Inside the court, there are no lawyers. A man must speak for himself. He stands on a raised stone platform, the bema, facing a wall of 500 jurors. The jurors do not sit in polite silence. They shout, jeer, and hiss. The timing of a speech is controlled by the clepsydra, a water clock. It is a ceramic jar with a small hole at the bottom. When the stopper is pulled, the water drains into a lower vessel. When the water runs out, the speech ends. If a man stutters or loses his place as the water drips away, the jurors take it as a sign of guilt. Evidence is physical and raw. A common tactic is to bring one's weeping children and aging mother onto the floor of the court to evoke eleos, pity. There are no written depositions from slaves. A slave's testimony is only legally valid if it is extracted under physical torture. The sound of a slave screaming in a side room is a standard part of the Athenian legal process. The logic is brutal. A slave will only tell the truth if the pain of a lie is greater than the fear of his master. The verdict is reached with sephoi, small bronze discs with either a solid or a hollow axle. A solid axle means acquittal, a hollow one means conviction. Jurors walk past two bronze urns, dropping their disc into one while hiding their thumb to keep the vote secret. The clatter of 500 bronze discs hitting the bottom of an urn is the sound of a man's fate being sealed. There is no appeal. The city's executioners are standing by with the hemlock or the wooden boards used for apotympanismos, a slow, upright execution by exposure. The risk of a lawsuit governs every interaction in the street. A man does not lend money without witnesses. He does not enter a house without an invitation. The city is a web of potential traps, where a single misplaced word or a dispute over a boundary stone can lead to total ruin. The physical reality of the court is a reminder that in Athens, your neighbor is your most dangerous predator. As the sun dips lower, the focus shifts from the legal traps of the city center to the salt-slicked docks of the Piraeus, where the empire's wealth is unloaded by the ton. The Piraeus is not Athens. It is the city's lungs, and it breathes salt, pitch, and the sweat of 20 nations. A citizen walking the 5 miles down the long walls enters a different world. The Piraeus is a grid of wide, straight streets designed by Hippodamus of Miletus, a sharp contrast to the tangled guts of the upper city. The air is thick with the smell of rotting seaweed, cedar wood, and the pungent garum, fermented fish sauce, being unloaded from Phoenician merchantmen. The Emporion, the massive commercial harbor, is a forest of masts. Here, the hoplitae, heavy infantry, give way to the nautae, the rowers and sailors who man the fleet. These are the men of the vites class, the poorest citizens who gain their political power from the oars. The sound is a deafening cacophony of pulley blocks shrieking, heavy crates of silphium, a prized medicinal herb, being dropped onto stone quays, and the rhythmic oop of rowing masters training new recruits in the trireme sheds. Every item in an Athenian's life passes through these docks. Huge blocks of marble from Paros, rolls of papyrus from the Nile Delta, and crates of smoked fish from the Black Sea are piled high. The Pentecost, the 2% customs tax, is collected here by contractors who bid for the right to squeeze the merchants. They use iron probes to stab into sacks of grain, checking for hidden luxury goods or smuggled silver. The physical movement of goods is a 24-hour operation. The ships must be unloaded and turned around before the Etesian winds shift and trap them in the harbor. The Kantharos harbor is where the warships live. The Neosoikoi, ship sheds, are massive limestone ramps where the triremes are hauled out of the water to dry. A waterlogged ship is a slow ship, and a slow ship is a coffin. Slaves spend the afternoon charring the hulls, using torches to singe away marine growth, and reapplying layers of toxic lead-based paint to keep the borers at bay. The heat from the torches and the smell of burning resin create a permanent haze over the naval quarter. The Piraeus is a social frontier. It is where you find the metoikoi at their most powerful and where the cults of foreign gods, Bendis from Thrace or Isis from Egypt, have their first altars. A citizen here feels the raw power of the thalassocracy, Cyril. He sees the silver owls of Athens being exchanged for the gold derricks of Persia. There is no sentimentality here, only the cold logistics of an empire that must import everything to survive. As the light turns gold over the Saronic Gulf, the laborers finish their shifts, and the focus of the city turns toward the most basic of human needs, the evening meal. The evening meal is the deipnon, the main event of the Athenian day, but for the majority of the population, it is a lesson in austerity. The romantic image of platters of roasted meat is a myth reserved for the super-wealthy or the days of religious sacrifice. For the average citizen, the diet is the Mediterranean triad: grain, oil, and wine. The base is maza, a heavy, unleavened barley cake that is more like a dense biscuit than bread. It is eaten with opsion, anything that gives the bland grain some flavor. The most common opsion is the onion or the leek, eaten raw. A man who smells of onions is recognized as a commoner, a man of the fields or the docks. If he is lucky, his wife has prepared a pistos, a thick pea or lentil soup flavored with a splash of vinegar and a drizzle of greenish, bitter olive oil. Meat is a rarity, a luxury of the elite. When it does appear, it is usually soot-stained, salted pork or goat that has been dried to the consistency of leather and must be boiled for hours to be edible. Fish is the true protein of Athens. The opsopoli, fishmongers, in the agora are the most hated and envied men in the city. They use a bronze bell to announce the arrival of fresh fish. When the bell rings, the crowd rushes the stalls like an army. The wealthy buy glaucos, bluefish, or sea bream, while the poor settle for aphis, small, bony fry or anchovies that are fried in a pan until the bones are soft enough to swallow. Archaeological middens in the Kerameikos show a staggering amount of these tiny fish bones, proving that the Athenian Empire was built on a foundation of sardines. Wine is the universal lubricant, but it is never drunk straight. To drink a kratos, unmixed, wine in the evening is the mark of a barbaros or a madman. The ratio is typically 3 parts water to 1 part wine. It is mixed in a crater, a large ceramic vat. The water in Athens is often brackish or warm, so the wine serves as a disinfectant and a flavoring agent. It is a thin, vinegary liquid, often flavored with pine resin, the ancestor of modern retsina, or even sea water to preserve it. The physical act of cooking is done over a kytropus, a 3-legged ceramic brazier filled with charcoal. There are no chimneys. The smoke curls around the ceiling and exits through a small hole in the roof or the doorway. The kitchen is the hottest, smokiest room in the house, usually tucked away in the back. A slave girl hunches over the coals, her eyes red from the smoke, stirring a pot of melas zomos, black broth, or pounding garlic in a stone mortar. By the time the meal is served, the sun has disappeared. The house is lit by liknoi, small terracotta oil lamps that cast a flickering, greasy light and fill the air with the smell of burning vegetable oil. The meal is eaten in silence by the family, a functional refueling before the darkness takes over. But for the men of the house, the deep non is often just a prelude to the symposium, while for the women, the evening brings a return to the domestic prison. The Athenian house is not a home in the modern sense. It is a fortress of social reputation. Built of sun-dried mud bricks on a foundation of fieldstones, the exterior is a windowless, featureless wall that turns its back on the street. The only entrance is a single heavy wooden door, bolted from the inside. This is the oikos, the domain where the physical separation of the genders is enforced by the very architecture of the building. A man's honor is tied directly to the aphaenia, the invisibility, of his wife and daughters. Inside, the house is divided by a strict boundary. The andron, the men's quarters, is usually located near the entrance. It is the only room with a plastered floor, often decorated with a simple pebble mosaic. This is where the master of the house receives guests. Beyond this lies the gynekonitis, the women's quarters, often located on the second floor or at the very back of the courtyard. The stairs are narrow and steep, made of wood that creaks under the weight of a slave. A woman does not leave these rooms without the express permission of her husband, and even then, she is veiled and accompanied by a servant. The physical labor of the domestic sphere is a never-ending cycle of woolworking. The sound of the house is the rhythmic clack-clack of the loom weights. Inscriptions on grave lekythoi, oil jars, frequently depict women holding a spindle or a distaff. In Athens, a good woman is one whose hands are perpetually stained by the lanolin of raw wool. They wash the fleeces in large ceramic tubs, card the fibers, and spin them into thread. The air in the women's quarters is thick with the dust of the loom and the smell of boiled dyes, madder for red, saffron for yellow. Privacy is non-existent for the household slaves. They sleep in the corridors or in the small, dark storage rooms packed with jars of grain and salted olives. The oikets, the house slave, is the first to wake and the last to sleep, fanning the charcoal braziers and emptying the amorges, the ceramic chamber pots, into the street gutters. The physical layout of the house ensures that the master can monitor every movement. There are no locks on the internal doors, only heavy wool curtains that muffle the sound of voices but do not stop the intrusion of the patriarch. The domestic prison is also a place of manufacturing. The house is a small factory, producing the clothes, the bread, and the children that the city requires. A woman's worth is measured by her sophrosyne, her self-control and silence. If a stranger's voice is heard in the courtyard, the women vanish into the upper rooms. To be seen by a man who is not a relative is a physical stain on the family's doxa reputation. The mud brick walls are thick, but they are not soundproof. The neighbors are always listening for a breach of the rules. As the lamps are lit and the house settles into its evening rhythm, the master of the house prepares to leave. The domestic walls are too small for his ambition. The real social power of the night lies in the symposium, where the rules of the city are rewritten over watered wine. While the citizens argue in the Andron, the true cost of Athenian democracy is being paid in the hills of southern Attica. The silver mines of Laurion are the dark engine of the empire. Without the silver pulled from these jagged tunnels, there would be no Parthenon, no triremes, and no threeoble jury pay. The physical reality of Laurion is a vision of hell. Thousands of slaves, many of them prisoners of war or men sold for debt, work in stope mines, tunnels so narrow they must crawl on their bellies for 12 hours a day. The mines are a labyrinth of suffocation. The air is heavy with the toxic fumes of lead and arsenic, a byproduct of the galena ore. Slaves carry small ceramic lamps in their teeth, the flickering flame providing the only light in the crushing darkness. The sound is the dull, wet thud of iron picks hitting the silver-bearing rock. Archaeological surveys of the Laurion region have uncovered shackle bolts, iron rings used to chain slaves together so they could not flee during the night. These men never see the sun. They live, work, and die in the belly of the earth. The surface of Laurion is a massive industrial wasteland. The ore is crushed in heavy stone mortars and then washed on large, rectangular cement platforms. This process requires vast amounts of water, a scarce resource in the dry hills. Huge cisterns were carved into the rock to catch every drop of winter rain. The washeries are manned by gangs of slaves who stir the crushed ore in the water, letting the heavy silver sink to the bottom while the waste is skimmed off. The runoff from these pits turns the soil gray and sterile, a landscape of industrial poison that stands in stark contrast to the marble beauty of the city. The smelting process is the final, most lethal stage. Huge furnaces, fueled by charcoal made from the vanishing forests of Attica, roar at temperatures high enough to melt stone. The cupellation process separates the lead from the silver, releasing clouds of heavy metal vapors that coat the lungs of the workers. A slave in the Laurion mines has a life expectancy of perhaps 3 to 5 years. They are treated as disposable tools, cheaper to replace with a new purchase from the Piraeus market than to feed and house properly. The wealth generated here is staggering. In a good year, Laurion produces enough silver to mint millions of owls. This silver allows Athens to bypass the traditional limits of an agrarian economy. It buys the grain that the citizens eat for breakfast. It pays the rowers who dominate the sea. Every time a citizen clinks a coin in the agora, he is holding a piece of the suffering of Laurion. The physical reality of the mine is the hidden basement of the Athenian Golden Age. As the silver is hauled in heavy carts toward the city, the elite prepare for their nightly ritual. The suffering of the mines is far away, muffled by the music of the flute girls and the high-status competition of the banquet. The symposium is not a party. It is a calculated political and social tool disguised as a drinking session. It takes place in the Andron, where 7 to 15 men recline on clini, wooden couches with headrests. They do not sit. They lie on their left sides, propped up by cushions, leaving their right hands free to reach for the wine. The physical posture is a mark of the elite. Only freemen recline, slaves stand, and low men sit. The room is small, designed to create an atmosphere of intense, sweaty intimacy. The ritual begins with the election of a symposiarch, the toastmaster. His job is to decide the crosses, the ratio of water to wine for the evening. If he wants a night of serious political plotting, he keeps the wine weak. If he wants to humiliate a rival, he calls for a kratos, strong, wine. The wine is poured from a hydria into a crater, where it is stirred with a long ladle. The physical act of mixing is a metaphor for the city itself, the blending of different elements into a single, functional whole. The entertainment is provided by all Atrides, flute girls, and Hittai. These women are the only females allowed in the andron, and their presence is purely functional. They provide the music that dictates the rhythm of the drinking and the conversation. The sound of the aulos, a double-piped reed instrument, is shrill and haunting, echoing off the plastered walls. Between the songs, the men play katabos. This is a high-energy game where a man flings the dregs of his wine from a shallow cup, kylix, at a bronze target across the room. The goal is to knock a small disc off a stand. The floor of the andron quickly becomes a sticky mess of spilled wine and dregs. The conversation is the real battle. Men engage in akos, the art of making plausible arguments. They debate strategy, mock their political enemies, and recite poetry. But this is a game of masks. One wrong word, one sign of hubris, overweening pride, can lead to a lawsuit the next morning. The physical proximity, the touching of shoulders, the sharing of the same wine bowl, creates a false sense of brotherhood that can vanish the moment the sun rises. Evidence of these nights is found in the thousands of kylix, drinking cups, decorated with scenes of the symposium itself. Many of these cups have eyes painted on the bottom, so that when the drinker lifts the cup, he wears a ceramic mask. It is a visual reminder that the symposium is a performance. By midnight, the air is thick with the smell of unmixed wine, perfume, and the charcoal of the braziers. The men are drunk, but the stakes remain high. A symposium often ends with a komos, a drunken procession through the streets where the men vandalize property and mock the idiots who are sleeping. The morning will bring the hangover of reality, but before the sun returns, the citizen must fulfill his final, most terrifying obligation, the physical appeasement of the gods. Religion in Athens is not a matter of private belief. It is a series of loud, messy, and physical public acts. The dawn after a symposium often finds the citizen at the base of the Acropolis, participating in a physia, a blood sacrifice. There is no spiritual reflection here. The air is thick with the copper tang of fresh blood and the heavy, sweet stench of burning animal fat. This is a contract. The city gives the gods their portion of the meat, and the gods, in theory, keep the plague and the Spartans away. The physical centerpiece of the ritual is the bull. It is led to the stone altar, its horns often gilded with gold leaf to mask the reality of its impending death. The kanoun, a basket containing the sacrificial knife hidden under grains of barley, is carried by a young maiden. The citizen watches as the priest sprinkles water on the bull's head, forcing it to nod, a symbolic consent to its own slaughter. The transition from life to meat is instantaneous. The throat is slit with a bronze blade, and the blood is caught in a ceramic vessel to be splashed against the sides of the altar. Archaeological excavations around the Parthenon have uncovered ash altars meters deep, composed of the calcified remains of thousands of years of these fires. The gods do not want the steak. They want the knives, the smoke from the thigh bones wrapped in fat. The rest of the animal is butchered on the spot with heavy iron cleavers. This is one of the few times a common Athenian eats high-quality protein. The meat is roasted on abaloi, spits, over charcoal braziers, and the distribution is a social hierarchy in itself. The priests and magistrates take the best cuts. The common citizens scramble for the rest. The temples themselves, like the Hephaestion overlooking the agora, are not quiet places of prayer. They are brightly painted in garish reds, blues, and golds, shouting their presence to the sky. They are storehouses of physical wealth, packed with bronze tripods, captured enemy shields, and ivory-inlaid furniture. To enter a temple is to walk through a forest of anathemata, votive offerings left by men who survived a shipwreck or a battle. Each object is a physical receipt of a deal made with a deity. But the gods are fickle, and even the largest sacrifice cannot stop the physical reality of a changing climate or a failing war. As the smoke from the altars drifts over the city, it mingles with a much darker haze rising from the surrounding fields of Attica. Daily life in Athens undergoes a violent physical contraction when the Fructoria, the beacon fires, signal the approach of the Peloponnesian army. This is the reality of 431 to 404 BCE. The citizen is no longer a trader or a builder. He is a hoplite. He rushes home to pull his panoply from the wall. The bronze kairos, breastplate, and neimides, greaves, are heavy, cold, and smell of the oil used to prevent rust. The aspes, a heavy wooden shield faced with bronze, weighs nearly 15 pounds. Carrying it is a feat of physical endurance that defines his masculinity. The city walls, once a point of pride, become a cage. Pericles' strategy is to abandon the countryside and huddle the entire population of Attica, nearly 300,000 people, inside the fortifications. The physical result is a humanitarian catastrophe. Families from the rural demes sleep in the cramped spaces between the long walls, under the porticos of temples, and in makeshift shacks made of scrap wood and hides. The Great Plague of 430 BCE is the direct consequence of this density. The sound of the city changes from the roar of commerce to the rhythmic wailing of funeral processions. Outside the walls, the citizen watches from the battlements as the Spartans methodically burn his livelihood. The smoke rising from the horizon is the smell of his olive groves and grain fields turning to ash. This is economic warfare in its most visceral form. Since an olive tree takes 20 years to reach full production, the sight of a Spartan axe hitting a trunk is a blow that will be felt for generations. The citizen's diet shrinks to the barest essentials of imported grain, and the price of a single dried fig skyrockets as the blockade tightens. The long walls are the city's only lifeline. Without the constant flow of ships from the Piraeus, the city would be a tomb. The labor shifts from construction to taikopoi, wall mending. Men work through the night to patch cracks in the mud-brick ramparts with rubble and timber. The physical exhaustion is total. A citizen spends his day on guard duty, his night in a crowded shack, and his mornings at the assembly, voting on desperate measures to fund the fleet. The glory of Athens is now a thin line of bronze-clad men standing on a crumbling wall, staring at a horizon filled with enemy campfires. The war is not a distant event. It is the noise of a battering ram against the gate and the sight of your own house burning 5 miles away. It reshapes the very layout of the streets, turning public squares into refugee camps. The final collapse of the Athenian Empire in 404 BCE did not erase the physical blueprint of the city. The legacy of the street is not found in books, but in the way the Athenian layout forced humans to interact. The narrow, winding alleys and the vast, open agora created a culture of agon, competition. Because men were forced into the heat, the noise, and the constant physical presence of one another, they developed the tools of rhetoric, logic, and democratic theater. The city was a laboratory of human friction. Evidence of this legacy is visible in the ostracons found in the pits of the Ceramicus. Thousands of pottery shards with names like Themistocles or Aristides scratched into them. These are the physical remains of the ostracism ritual, where the citizens used their trash to exile their leaders. It shows a society that understood power as something physical that could be cast out with a piece of broken clay. The stones of the Pnyx, where the assembly met, are worn smooth not by time, but by the feet of thousands of men who stood in the sun to decide the fate of their world. The daily life of an Athenian was a brutal, high-stakes grind. It was a world of lit hoi, stones, and sidros, iron, of salt-crusted skin and the constant thread of the hemlock cup. There was no safety net, only the oikos and the polis. The physical reality of their survival, the grain ships, the silver mines, the blood on the altar, shaped a mindset that was unsentimental and fiercely competitive. They did not invent democracy on paper. They fought for it in the mud of the marketplace and the grease of the trireme sheds. Today, the ruins of the agora are silent, but the physical logic of the space remains. The distance from the speaker's platform to the back of the crowd was the exact limit of the unamplified human voice, the physical boundary of ancient democracy. If you want to see more of how the grit of the past built the world of the present, make sure to check out our other videos on the ancient world. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our next historical expedition. The Athenian street was a place of traps, beauty, and blood. It was a city that demanded everything from its citizens and gave them back a world that, for better or worse, we still inhabit today. Would you like me to generate an image of a bustling Athenian agora at sunset to cap off this journey?